Okay, so Feats of Strength. I promised I would make a video about Feats of Strength after they went on the PBE. They've at this point been on the PBE for over a week. I'm a little late, but sorry about that. Stuff happened, Thanksgiving, that kind of stuff. But yeah, I'm here now, making as usual, really kind of low budget, really poorly done one take video about feats of strength. So before I get into it, kind of a refresher for anyone who hasn't seen me before or seen my YouTube channel before or whatever. Who am I? Why am I making this video? What's this video going to be about? So I'm Endstep or Riot Endstep or Nick Fridge or Riot Fridge or whatever you know me by, or maybe don't know me by, I don't know. I am a game designer that works on the Summoner's Rift team seasonal pod. So, for those of you unfamiliar with how the game designers that work on League are structured, this is the Summoner's Rift team. So it's the team that like upkeeps Summoner's Rift. One of the other pods on the team is the live pod, which is like where Freak is, and that's the people who do the, week to week balance patches. The seasonal pod is the people that work on things like seasonal updates. So, for example, last year, I am the person who was working on the item system. So I did like the big demythicking, and I also myself did the rework for the AP system and the tank system that we did in season 14. Made a bunch of items and had a great time doing that. So this year, for the 2025 season, I have been working on feats of strength. That's sort of who I am. And talking about feats of strength, I'm going to be talking about why we made this system, some of the design decisions behind it, some of the intent, like what we're looking for out of the system, where we're going to, where we might go with it in the future, that kind of thing, some of the past versions of it. I'm just going to be talking about the dev process and our current, thoughts on it, our understanding of where we are right now with feats. And also, sorry about this kind of horrendous slide here. I've got some Google Sheets going on. But unfortunately, right now, as I mentioned in this slide, feats are currently broken on the PB, so I can't really easily pull the UI up. So sorry about that. But I do at least have some stuff that I was able to pull from Spider Axe's Twitter, like these nice item icons or images. Anyway, so let's talk about feats of strength. I'm going to talk through the system because I think a lot of people actually aren't, super familiar with the exact way that the system works. And so I'm going to talk through how the system works, what it is, and then I'll kind of talk about where we're going with it, that kind of stuff. So let's start out with how does the system actually work? Feats of strength. So there is a little UI element at the bottom of your tab screen, the scoreboard, that you can hover over, and you will. It has a big tooltip that kind of explains the whole thing. But basically, the way it works is Feats of Strength is a best of 3 system. There are 3 feats of strength that you can get: First Blood, First Turret, and Monster Slaying. Monster Slaying is essentially first team to 3 epic monster kills. And note that the way epic monster kills is defined, or epic monster claims, I forget which terminology we're using right now, is defined. It means that for the grubs, which are obviously kind of a weird outlier epic monster, you have to get all 3 grubs from the same spawn for that to count for the monster slaying. So, like, for example, if you got 1 grub from the first spawn and 2 from the second spawn, you actually would not get any monster slaying stacks. Of course, your opponent wouldn't either, because that naturally means that they also got partial kills, but you have to get the entire camp, all 3 of the grubs, in order to get a stack of monster slaying. For all other epic monsters, it's, what you would expect, because they're all singular epic monsters, right? You kill a dragon, you get a stack. You kill 3 dragons, you're done, right? Even if you get none of the void, topside objectives. You kill a Rift Herald, that gives a stack. Baron, theoretically, although it's pretty hard for it to go till Baron spawns, especially with Otacon, which is a whole other thing I'm not going to talk about in this video. That's another designer's project, or actually another multiple designers project. So these 3 feats of strength you can get, or your opponents can get them, right? Only one team can get either one. So it's first to 3 epic monsters, not like both teams cannot get monster slaying. So essentially, what it is whoever, whichever team gets two of these first, right? It's best of three. So if you get first blood and first turret, and it doesn't actually matter whether your opponent has monster slaying or not. If you get first blood and first turret, that's it. You win feats of strength. Your team is the winners, and you get the triumphant boot upgrades. So these are basically similar to like Ornn upgrades for your boots, but they're very, very small, right? You'll notice that these values are pretty minimal, right? 5% AS, 5 haste, 5 armor, a little bit of magic pen. I'm actually not sure, by the way, if 4 magic pen is the right amount. Might be a little too much. I'm not 100% sure on that. Anyway, the triumphant boots are what you get immediately, right? So when you win feats of strength, your team immediately gets, this is mathed out to be close to, for each boot, around 150 gold worth of stats, right? So obviously, in some cases that may not, maybe your champion scales a little better with these stats than that, or maybe you scale a little worse. But you can kind of think of this as getting a little bit of gold in immediate value for winning feats of strength. Oh, one thing I did forget to mention about feats of strength that some people do not realize yet: first turret and first blood do not give gold anymore. So if you're thinking, wow, first turret's going to be really crazy, it gives you a feat and it gives you, extra local gold. It doesn't do that anymore. Those gold rewards are gone. So first blood is worth 300 gold now. First turret is worth the same amount as any other turret in terms of gold, but it also gives you a feat, of course. Anyway, so these triumphant boot upgrades are immediate and they give you value as long as you have tier 2 boots. If you buy tier 2 boots later, like say, you're playing like set top or something, you have tier 1 boots, you get first blood, and you get first turret by yourself, and you just don't have tier 2 boots. When you buy tier 2 boots later, right, like maybe you buy your mercs later because the enemy team has fiddlesticks or whatever, they will instantaneously get the triumphant upgrade. You'll notice that the way this works is they get a border similar to Ornn, different border, of course. It looks a little more Noxian. And they get the prefix triumphant, right? In every case, kind of similar to how Ornn it puts masterwork on all the items. All the boots get triumphant, which of course looks very nice and silly when you buy it with Ionians because they're called triumphant Ionian boots of lucidity. It's very long, very ridiculous. I recommend hovering it. It's kind of funny. You have a good laugh. So yeah, but the triumphant boot upgrades are pretty low value, right? They're really not a lot of gold. And in fact, I would actually strongly make a case that if it was just this is actually way worse than getting 100 gold for first blood and 300 local gold or whatever it is now. What is it, 250, 300? I don't remember. For first turret, because those gold amounts both come in earlier in the game. They're and they're actually gold. And I guess as a third point, they're also concentrated, right? Like first blood's always on one person, and first turret is usually going to be one person or split amongst 2 or rarely 3 people, right? So concentrated gold is better. Actual gold is a lot better than getting gold for stats, right? Like, compare like a random item like Cosmic Drive, for example. Cosmic Drive as a completed item is like 130% gold efficient, in terms of its stats, before you consider the passive at all, right? And obviously it's an outlier, right? It's one of the most gold efficient, one of the more gold efficient items that we have. But when you're talking about like raw gold value comparatively to giving you that amount of gold worth of stats, if you think about feats, it's like, oh, these are worth 150 gold each. Oh my God, they're worth, it's 750 gold instantaneously. It's like, well, no, not really, right? It's like much less powerful than that. And this is actually, these triumphant boot upgrades, I actually suspect may not be strong enough. We might actually need to buff these. I'm not 100% sure about that though. So that's something we'll be looking at closely when we launch this. I don't think I'm going to change this before launch, but it's something I've been thinking about, is that I suspect these probably aren't quite good enough. Anyway, the cool thing though is you get access to tier 3 boots if you win feats. So you can see this red line. This, by the way, goes away now. This red line of requirements text, it goes away if you meet the requirements, so you don't see this red line. I should probably do the same thing for like the support items, though I guess not that many people buy the support items in this shop, so it doesn't really matter. Anyway, so these tier 3 boot upgrades, they all cost 750 gold, and then they give you some kind of new unique effect, and also up the stats. So for example, you can look at Lucidity. Base Ionians, right? Base haste boots give 10 haste. You get 5 haste from the Triumphant upgrade. So upgrading to Crimson Lucidity gives you 10 extra haste. So there's some variability here in how much gold worth of stats I'm giving you based on the unique. So for example, with Crimson Lucidity, we didn't want to make this passive, the Noxian Haste, too powerful. And so Crimson Lucidity gives 10 haste, which is a little bit more gold value worth than is typical for these boots. So we'll see how that works out. Obviously, some of these are probably going to need some further balancing. They all do, I want to note, give at least 5 movement speed. The boots that only have movement speed as a stat give plus 10, but they all give an extra 5 movement speed. Just as a nice way to kind of like give you a little bit of extra gold value. But you'll note that these require owning 2 legendary items. So basically you can't win feats and then instantaneously go buy your gunmetal greaves as an AD carry unless you already have 2 legendaries, which doesn't really happen that often. The champions that can do that, by the way, are supports, because the completed support item does count as a legendary. So if you're having a really good game as a support, there will be situations where, like, especially if you get first blood, like, or like you get first blood in bot lane, and you're really ahead as a support, and you have your first item, say it's like a this actually happened to me in a playtest recently. I was playing, I think it was Lulu, some enchanter. I think it was probably Lulu. So I was playing some enchanter. I had my support item completed. We won feats by getting first blood in bot lane and also pushing down the first turret. And I had my completed support item, which was pretty early in the game. I don't remember the exact timing. It might have been like 13 minutes or something like that. And I already had my Shurelya's. And so I actually could then immediately upgrade to Crimson Lucidity because I had 2 legendary items. So supports actually tend to get access to this really early in the game just because the support item counts, which I think is really cool. I think it's a cool thing to give to supports. And that's one of the reasons why I made sure that the support item did count as a legendary, because I didn't want the system to just like screw supports and say like, oh, you can't, you have to wait a really long time to be able to complete these. I think these boots are cool and fun, and you should be able to access them if you win the feats. So anyway, there's a variety of these, right? There's one of these, of course, for every single boot. And I'll talk about, individually about these in a bit. But essentially you pay, once you have 2 legendaries, you can pay 750 gold. And the goal for this is that 750 gold you spend on these boots is not better than buying a legendary, right? Like if you somehow, get yourself into a situation where you have 2 legendaries and you have like 3,000 gold and you could buy another legendary, ideally, tuning wise, the goal here is that the legendary item will always be better, right? That these boots will not be as efficient as legendaries, but they will be more efficient than components. So like, say for example, you could buy like a blasting wand or the upgraded sorcerer's shoes, the spellslinger's shoes. The spellslinger shoes, the intent, right? Again, this may not actually, manifest at current tuning, right? We probably still have a little tuning to do here and probably need to do some on live. But the intent is that the 750 gold you spend there is better than like probably better than like a blasting wand. It certainly should be better than like 2 long swords, right? If you're, say like a AD assassin, say you're like Talon or something, you base with 750 gold after getting your, first 2 items, whatever those are. I don't even know what Talon builds these days. But the Crimson Lucidity should probably be better than 2 longswords. Or should generally be better than 2 longswords. Of course, there will be champions that are outliers, and of course, those champions, can't necessarily account for every single case. But the ideal goal here is that most of the time, that 750 gold is more efficient than a component, less efficient than a legendary. And so the goal here, the reason why we're charging you for tier 3 boots, and like why this whole system is kind of set up this way, is that we want to give players options as a reward. This is a new thing we're experimenting with, is that, hey, one of the things that we're giving you here isn't straight up raw power, right? You have to pay for this. We are giving you a little bit of raw power, right? The Triumphant upgrades. But as I mentioned, this is really not that powerful, right? Like these Triumphant upgrades are pretty low power for the most part. And so the thing we're experimenting with here is adding an option to you, which generally should be good, right? We don't want to make this a trap for newer players, like, oh, haha, we tricked you into buying, boots that only should be purchased after your 4th item or whatever, right? And we don't really want people to buy these super, super, super early, because obviously some of these movement speed passives can be relatively warping for certain types of combat early in the game. And so there's a variety of reasons why we limited it to, hey, only after you finish 2 legendaries. We also just don't want these coming in too early in the game. But We want these boot effects to be something that a really skilled player will understand how to play around, and like there's some mastery and understanding in the item system and understanding like, hey, this is an option that sometimes will not be correct to purchase immediately after your two legendaries based on your base timings and stuff like that. And we want them to be good enough that if you're a less skilled player and you buy them, you're not like completely screwing yourself very much or very frequently. But that there is some depth to this system in that we're giving you an option rather than just raw power, in the same way that like Baron buff isn't giving you any options, right? It's just making you more powerful. Gives you AD, gives you AP, buffs your minions. Obviously, there's skillful ways to use Baron buff, but that's absolutely true. But it's not optional in the same way that this system is, right? And so this is a new type of reward. And speaking of this, one thing I do want to note about this system before I get into talking about the individual boots and stuff like that, this system as a whole, right, this whole Feats system, it is somewhat experimental, right? Like this is a space that we've never really explored before, and we're very interested in it, both in terms of deferred power, kind of similar to Dragon Soul, right? This is something that we do have, some experience, doing in the past is like Dragon Soul, like deferring power, so that it's more about getting to 4 dragons and that being a way to leverage your lead, and you don't immediately get like crazy more powerful for taking a dragon. The deferred power we have a little experience with, but the optionality stuff we don't. And so this is, this and also, tying specific events in the game to power output, right? The feats, the first blood, first turret, and monster slaying. All of these things are things that we're very interested in learning about, and it's very possible we may need to adjust these in the future, right? Like, for example, I've seen lots of feedback of people saying like, oh, first blood should not be this important, or what was the other really big point of feedback I was seeing? Oh, the losing team should have access to these boots, right? These shouldn't only be for the winning team. It's like very possible. Like I could definitely see, either or both of those being absolutely correct. But in some ways, it was like we have to try a version of the system to get better understanding. And I'm perfectly happy to make changes and consider people's feedback. Like absolutely. As an example here, one of the things we've already talked about doing for feats is if it turns out that first blood being this important is actually like really frustrating for players and like less fun than less fun than it's worth, right? Like makes the game more stressful, or makes first blood too stressful an event for players. It's like we could, for example, this is a very simple version. I don't think we would do just this, but like we could, for example, make feats instead of a best of 3 system, a best of 5 system, right? Add 2 more feats or change the existing feats we have. And then first blood, of course, is relatively less important. Rather than being half of the inputs that you need to win, it would only be 1/3, right? And so there's mitigations that we have, that we're thinking about, and so yeah, absolutely keep giving feedback on this system, and we'll definitely be watching closely when this thing comes out. But this is just something that we really want to experiment with and see how things go. And it is very possible that this system is something that will undergo changes in the future. Not that I want to say that's like don't take this as like me not having confidence in the system. I think it's relatively fun most games. But obviously there are parts of it that can be frustrating, right? Like losing first blood to like an invade or something like that obviously can be a pretty poor experience in this system, especially if you do end up losing feats off of that. But we've tested the system a lot, and I think it's generally a positive in most games. So yeah, and if we need to make improvements, we'll be around. So let's talk about the individual boots here. Before I get like, I'll kind of run back and talk about like how we got here. Actually, that doesn't make sense. Let's talk about the system as a whole before I talk about the individual boots. So, feats of strength. So let's talk about this a little bit. How did we get here, right? Why did we decide to make this system? Ultimately, this comes down to us looking at like some trends that you may have noticed. For example, Split 3 or Season 3, whatever we're calling it these days, the live pod did a pass on all items and reduced the gold efficiency, really reduced the stats and in some cases uniques of almost every item in the game to make items less powerful. And people who pay a lot of attention will probably already know like a lot of the messaging around that. But like to sort of sum it up, over the years, players have started getting a lot more gold per minute. Some of this is because we've added more gold sources to the game, and we've generally made gold, made gold a little more accessible, right? Turret plates, of course, are a huge contributor here. But also CS, right? We've literally made minions worth more gold, more cannon spawn than did in the past, and we've made a lot of changes such that gold is increased, in the game. But also players have just gotten better, right? Players not only CS better, but they spend their time more efficiently at basically every MMR, right? Like at every rank, players get better every year. And while 1 year to 1 year, that difference isn't huge, when you compound that over the 15 years that League of Legends has been around, players get a lot more gold now, right? They're just really good at the game, comparatively at every rank. And so we've been trying to do things to either reduce gold or reduce the power of gold, right? Like the item changes I was talking about where, items are now a little less powerful than they were before. Those changes were intended to make it so that each point of gold is worth less, right? They literally do that, right? Because if items are weaker, that means that when you spend, 3,600 gold or whatever to buy your death cap, you don't get as much power out of that than you did previously, right? So what I'm getting at here is Feats initially started as, or this version of Feats initially started as a way to take away immediate power granted by gold from things like First Blood and First Turret. And initially we had other sort of places we were draining gold as well, but we kind of ended up in the system where those are the two primary places. And not only just deferring that power, but putting it into a system that isn't just the item system. And so we have separate levers to control, like separate levers to control that, right? And that's kind of how you should approach this system. Is like okay, so these things, these triumphant boot upgrades and the optionality that we're giving you are, first of all, different types of rewards that hopefully people like and find fun, but also are ways that we can give less gold. So the game is, first of all, probably a little less directly snowbally, right? Like First Blood should probably not, someone getting First Blood should not immediately cause them to, start dominating the game, right? And one of the things that is really funny when talking to people about this is people really undervalue underrate how much gold is worth, especially early in the game, right? First Blood is only 100 gold, right? It's only effectively an increase of 33% on the initial kill, but it's actually a really big deal, right? Because when you think about it, 100 gold in the very first few minutes of the game is worth so much more than that 100 gold is worth later, right? If that ever pushes you over any breakpoint for an item on an early base, like a longsword or say like an amp tome or a dark seal, that is such a massive power difference, right? Like those early items have such a big impact on the game, right? We know this statistically, like we know how powerful that early gold is, and the short answer is it's a lot. That 100 gold was really worth a lot. And in fact, I think you could actually even make an argument that we would, that it might be nice to, reduce the snowbally of early kills in other ways besides just First Blood. But for the purpose of this project, we're just talking about First Blood, First Turret. And so a lot of the motivation here was originally around that gold reduction. Now, there was another motivator, which was, I don't know why I moved that slide there, which was giving players guidance in the early game, right? One of the things we know, especially for less skilled players, even less skilled players that want to improve, that are like actively trying really hard to get better, that are like trying to climb ranks and stuff like this, is it can be very hard for them to understand how they're supposed to play the first 14 minutes, right? It's like the laning phase, like it's very clear how you're supposed to play like laning phase, like, hey, protect your plates and get the enemy plates. Okay, well, if you can't do that, then maybe you roam to another lane and try and assist them in that. And beyond that, it can be kind of hard and like difficult for players to understand, like, well, when are they supposed to rotate for dragon? And, is it worth, when is it worth playing for a turret versus playing for plates? When should I play for kills versus playing for objectives, right? This kind of thing. And so one of the other goals for Feats is to give players some guidance on how they should be playing the laning phase in the early parts of the game, and especially make it easier to learn how to play out the early parts of the game, right? Like, obviously getting first blood is good, and that's not really what we're expecting here, but we do expect that formalizing things like first 3 epic monsters and first turret as a whole system, like a whole family that gives you a clear, much more noticeable bonus you can see in the tab screen. We do expect that to help players understand and drive action in the early game, right? Drive player actions in the early game and player understanding in the early game, and that's something that we're also really interested in. As hey, is this like actually something that helps people plan out their game? Is this something that is this the type of thing that players really enjoy? Like, would they want more calls to action and that kind of thing? Is something that we've noted as a pain point, right? Like we have surveys and stuff like this that we've done, and like one of the things that we believe that players consistently, or well, not believe, we know that players consistently want more of is like, hey, sometimes it's not clear what I should be doing, especially in the early game, and so this is one of the things that the system does is hopefully give players a bit of direction in how they should or maybe could play the game. So. Now that I've sort of talked about the purpose of the system and where we came from, let's talk about the individual boots themselves, starting out with the 2 that are on screen because they're already here. So these 2 are kind of similar. They give you movement speed in combat, specifically against champions. One thing I will note here in comparison to something like Zephyr actually worked on anything. These are only champions. I'm not 100% confident that's right, but that's where we're at right now because I didn't really I thought that it was pretty reasonable to do it, to set it up like this, and helps make it so that you're not constantly moving around at turbo speed. But for Ionians, the reason why there's so much text here, right? Empowering or protecting allies with abilities, dealing damage to enemy champions with abilities, or casting a summoner spell. If you think about it, Ionians really cover a lot of classes, right? AD assassins buy these, enchanters buy these, mages buy these, even fighters buy these, right? The reason why this has so many triggers and that this effect is so generic, just giving you movement speed for 4 seconds. By the way, it's 10% for melee and 8% for ranged right now. I don't even really know if we need the ranged melee split, but it's there in case we need it for tuning later. The reason why this is such a generic output is that this kind of needs to cover a lot of classes, right? We don't want like Sona to be really sad about Ionians, but we also don't really want Talon to be sad about Ionians or Zed or whatever, right? And they're pretty different, classes with the different needs, and so that's why these have so many different triggers and it's so generic. Is that what we found in testing? Like I had different versions of this. Like I had a stacking version of this, kind of similar to Zephyr, but for spells, which I thought was really cool, and it worked well for the mages that buy, haste boots. But the problem was like, imagine you're playing Milio and you have haste boots. Like you feel, you're depressed about these because you have one spell that damages enemies, right? Like you're not going to stack these boots, right? The stacking thing was also a little awkward for some of the AD assassins who don't hit too many, times with spells, and so that I ended up trimming this down to kind of a very simple, straightforward, like, yeah, you're just kind of fast when you're fighting champions, and that's kind of the end of it. Or at least a little faster, and it's kind of nice. The other thing is, again, remember, this actually gives 10 haste, so you're spending 750 gold, you get 10 haste, you get 5 movement speed, and you get this passive. So all in all, I think they're pretty nice. I actually kind of like where these boots ended up. Gunmetal Greaves is a little interesting. This is decaying movement speed. None of the other boots have this decaying effect. But it's pretty simple, pretty straightforward, right? Because we can kind of assume if you're building Berserker Greaves, you like attacking people, and you probably like attacking people a lot. And so getting this decaying movement speed for a shorter duration, we kind of expect like, hey, the Ashes of the world should be pretty happy with this. And the AD carries that generally don't attack that quickly, they mostly don't buy Berserkers, right? Like Samira, Jin, like Senna, for example, even like MF. The AD carries that don't really like to attack that much, that like, have more spell patterns or, some other pattern that doesn't involve attacking a lot, they usually don't buy Berserkers anyway. So I kind of like this decaying movement speed because, of course, decaying movement speed effectively scales with your attack speed, right? Because the faster you attack, the more frequently you proc this, and the more frequently you're getting the full benefit of this, the higher one. These boots, by the way, I'm very confident do need a range melee split because, of course, we have a few melee champions that do like buying Zerkers, but it's way harder for them to trigger this, right? Because they're melee, right? This is like the Yasuos, the Yones, the Master Yis, the Tryndamirs of the world. It's way harder for them to get a single attack off to get value out of this than it is like, say, Callista, right? Or Ashe. I guess Callista doesn't necessarily scale that well with movement speed, but like the Ashes of the world, or I don't know, who's another 80 carry that buys Zerker Greaves? Like, I'm like blanking there. He's like Tristana, right? So the goal here, this also was originally literally just the Zephyr passive, but I kind of changed it up a lot because we wanted to simplify, and we ended up in a spot where we felt like decaying movement speed was better. First of all, to differentiate it from the other boots, and second, to like reward you for building attack speed and like indexing into that, because again, the champions that want attack speed buy these boots, right? And if you don't want attack speed, then you don't buy these boots, right? There's lots of other good boots out there if you don't care that much about AS, right? If you're Samira, you can go buy your Tabbies or your Mercs or whatever. So Spellslinger's Shoes. This is the Sorks upgrade. You get extra magic pen, and this one doesn't have a unique passive. Instead, it gets a new stat, % magic pen. Now, something to note about these is gold efficiency-wise, like these are just like raw numerically, gold efficiency-wise, this is less than 750 gold worth of stats. However, I have been repeatedly told by people in tests that these boots are awesome, they're crazy, like they're so good. And it's like, well, I did the math, they're worse than 750 gold. It's very possible that because giving flat and % pen on the same item is like kind of innately synergistic, that maybe these need to be even less. But I think it's fine for these to, like, numerically it would be very easy to nerf these if it turns out that this is too much, like too strong. But I think it's very cool, like very for mages. And this is one of the things that I really like about these boots is that they're never going to be bad, right? Like 10% magic pen is always going to be a good thing to have. But really clever players can actually get benefit from this, of like making a decision around this, like, hey, maybe I go Sorks. If you win Feats, for example, maybe you don't get your Void Staff until like 4th or 5th item because you have a little bit of % magic pen, and you can change your build order based on this. And so I think there's some real potential for build flexibility with these, and I actually really like how these played out. It does mean that you do have a little bit more tank busting power, but do keep in mind, of course, that you get a lot more flat magic pen. Mathematically, this is going to depend a lot upon how much MR the enemy team has, but because they also give more for flat pen, and flat pen, of course, is better as you get more of it. The % magic pen is not as specifically anti-tank as you might think, because of course the flat pen is much better against squishies, right? So the extra flat pen you're getting, which is where a lot of the gold value here is as well. So I do like these. I think they're sweet. And not too much to say about these. If they need to be nerfed, pretty easy to nerf numbers on this. Then we get to the tank boots. These, I believe, I will probably be nerfing before we go to live. I suspect they're probably a little too strong right now on PB, but and internally at the same time. So these give you a shield after you take damage of the appropriate type. So for Mercs, the Chainlace Crushers upgrade, this is if you take magic damage, you get a magic shield for 4 seconds. Armored Advance, the Tabbies upgrade, or Steel Caps, or whatever we're calling them these days. After you take damage, they give you a physical shield. So here's the cool thing about this, right? So they have a level scaling value and also a % health value. Basically, we want these to be a little better for people who are durable, right? But we don't want them to be worthless for champions that, like Samira or whatever, if they happen to be buying these items. And the goal here is that if you can trigger more than one of these in a fight, you should probably be pretty happy with this upgrade. And if you can only trigger one, then it's not that great. Or like it's just like maybe passable. So I suspect the numbers are probably a little high. Regardless of whether the numbers are correct or not, something to really like to note about this is that this shield triggers after you take damage. So let's imagine that you're playing Xerath, right? Like I've seen some people saying like, oh my god, these are like just like Kaenic Rooker, these champions are going to be completely like immune to poke or whatever. This is not true. If you cast Xerath Q on someone who has Chainlaced Crushers, and then you don't use any other spells afterwards, they take full damage and they get no value from this shield. Now, if you have like a Ludens, the Ludens proc is delayed, and so the shield will trigger after your Q has fired. or has dealt damage, and then it might absorb some of the Luden's procs because Luden's has a delay on it. That's just how the spell works. But effects that come with the initial damage will not be blocked. So, for example, let's suppose you attack someone, you have a physical on hit, like a Bork or something like that. You attack someone who has armored advance. Your initial attack and your Bork damage will go through, and then they get the physical shield. And so these items are not intended to be like super anti-poke. In fact, they're actually not that good against poke most of the time. They're really just intended to be, yeah, you buy these boots are at their best when you're really like itemizing against the damage type of the enemy team. So for example, if you're playing, say, like, I don't know, what's a good example of this? Like you're playing Ornn top and you feel like you have to buy steel caps or tabbies, whatever, because your lane opponent is Darius or something like that. But the whole rest of the enemy team is magic damage. Fiddlesticks jungle, Ari mid, and they have Swain bot lane carrier or something like that. In that case, the upgrade shouldn't be as good. But in the case where it's like, hey, you're playing Ornn against triple AP topside and they have an 80 carry, but the 80 carry is not ahead, and you buy Chainlace Crusher's upgrade, it should be really good there. And so again, this is another example of like, we're giving you some optionality where, like, again, these upgrades should usually be good, but there will be situations where they're better and situations where they're worse. And so we're giving people who want to optimize around the shop more tools, hopefully, in the average game to like gain power by making good decisions and like gain some level of optimization in the shop, some depth, some extra depth to the shop when you do win feats. So yeah, again, I do suspect these are probably a little too strong, but we'll see. I have no idea. Yeah, right now this is 5% max HP, 150 at level 18, level scaling. Yeah, might take these numbers down a little bit. The last two, which are the movement speed boots, are a little weirder. So first of all, they gain more flat movement speed because there's just not much else place to put the power. I did, by the way, consider putting AD and AP on Forever Forward because, Synchronized Souls is just a really weird boot, and I thought it would be kind of funny if it was like 12 AD, 20 AP in addition to the movement speed. I might still do that. I think it's kind of cool idea. Anyway, so what was I talking about? So total movement speed. This is different than percent movement speed. So brief explanation of how League of Legends movement speed calculations work is you take your flat movement speed. So say you have 400 flat movement speed. You have boots, your Master Yi, and you have 45 movement speed from your boots. So you have 400 flat movement speed. If you have a percent movement speed steroid, that only multiplies your flat movement speed. So if you have 2% movement speed steroids, so like say you have a 10% increased movement speed and you have 20% increased movement speed, those add up to be 30% movement speed. And so you would have 30% increased on 400 movement speed. So that would be 520 before the soft caps. Is that right? Yeah, that's right. 520 before the soft caps. And then you would get soft cap down to some amount. I'm not doing the math for that. That's ridiculous. But you would get moved down. What total movement speed is, though, is it multiplies all of your movement speed, including your percent movement speed steroid. So there are some mechanics in the game that already work like this. Like, for example, Ramesque does this and Hecarim does this, where they multiply your other percent movement speed steroids. So like say, for example, you have the 10% total movement speed from Forever Forward on, and you have 400 flat movement speed and you have 25% movement speed. So you have 500 movement speed, again, not accounting for the soft caps, right? Like, again, disregard those for now. This 10% total movement speed will not just multiply your 100 movement speed from your flat. It will also multiply the percent movement speed steroids, right? So instead of gaining 40 ms, because it's, which is what a normal percent movement speed steroid would do, you will actually get 50 in this example case where you have 500, or where you have a 25% movement steroid on your 400 flat movement speed, because that puts you up to 500, again, before soft caps. Don't worry about the soft caps. Anyway, so total movement speed steroids basically multiply your other percent movement speed steroids. It's kind of cool, I think. It's possible these need some changes. I don't know if the total thing is quite cool enough, but hopefully it is. yeah, the goal here is that these two boots, first of all, because they are less purchased than the others, and second, because there's not that many things that they can do, because they also kind of similar to Ionians, they cover kind of an eclectic cast, like a fairly diverse cast of champions. Like Forever Forward is like, well, Quinn buys it a lot, but also it supports like Blitzcrank and Alistar buy these sometimes, right? It's like the souls, synchronized souls. So it's hard to cover all of the users in one kind of package, and so the place that I thought that I could make that work was by giving movement speed, right? Because everyone likes to go fast. Um, so hopefully these are cool and fun, and if not, then maybe we'll consider changing up exactly what these do, and then maybe 80 and AP here. I'm thinking about that. I think it might be cool. The more I think about it, the more cool I think it is. So maybe I'm kind of psyching myself into it. Anyway, thanks to SpiderAxe, by the way. I took these pictures from SpiderAxe's Twitter. So thanks for that. Uh, anyway, other things to talk about before I close out this video. What are other things that people would want to know? Cassiopeia. So Cassiopeia, her passive gets upgraded. She can't buy the tier 3 boots, obviously, but she gets the Triumphant upgrade, kind of like the let's see, these things. She gets the Triumphant upgrade to her passive, so instead of giving 4 movement speed per level, it gives 6 movement speed per level. And you can't really see it in the passive icon on your HUD, but if you hover it, it'll show you. It's called Triumphant Serpentine Grace. I replaced the title, like the name of the passive, and I replaced the tooltip and everything, and it gets the Noxian border. It's very cool. So hopefully the Cassiopeia players enjoy that. If you do win Feats of Strength, you get to go really fast. You do get a lot of movement speed, by the way. 6 MS per level is a lot. It's an extra, quite a lot of movement speed, right? 2 times 18, so it's an extra 36 MS at level 18. And you do get it immediately, so it can be quite powerful. So pretty cool, or hopefully pretty cool. What else should I talk about? Maybe talk about some previous versions before I call this video. So what other versions of this did we try? One that I really liked was we had a feat system that was a little different, where there were like feats that wouldn't necessarily be completed, where when the feat system was divided into a kind of individual line and a group line. This was kind of cool. It had problems, but this is just one that I think is cool to talk about. So there was like a group feat line, which was stuff like first turret and like, killing epic monsters, that kind of thing. Like stuff that you would generally do as a group, or like would be, macro objectives for your team. And then there were individual feats, which were like first blood and like going legendary, right? Like getting X number of kills in a row without dying, getting a pentakill, stuff like that, like individual feats I thought were pretty cool. There was one for an assist streak as well. And the reward I gave out back then was, if you did an individual feat, you would get an individual reward. And if you did a team feat, you would get a team reward. So that's kind of like the team rewards are kind of what we have now. Like that remains the system. The individual rewards were kind of interesting. I represented them with, I spawned a little mini Darius and then attached him to your character. He would like hover like on your shoulder. And then when you attacked, he would like swing his axe and do some damage. And then like when you killed someone, he would do his ult animation and then refund a percentage of your ultimate cooldown, which was very cool. It was very cute, like having a little mini Darius on people. But basically the way it worked was like if you got first blood, you would get mini Darius for like 4 minutes or something like that. And if you went legendary, you would get him for 10 minutes or something. And if you got a pentakill, you would get him for the rest of the game. It had a bunch of problems, but it was very cool. Having this theoretical like individual and group line, but it was kind of a lot. I don't know if we've shown any test footage from, that had my like sample UI, but in the upper right hand of your corner, it was just like this gigantic like block of text. Basically, it was such a crazy amount of information to convey to people. So there's kind of a lot. It was definitely way too much of like stuff going on. But it was kind of cool, and I did want to tell that story about the mini Darius following people around. Earlier version of feats, I actually had different ones for different types of feats as well. I had like a mini LeBlanc follower and a mini Swain follower too, that were pretty nice. It was very cute, very fun. But obviously that stuff didn't really end up panning out quite as well as I would have liked. What other previous versions are worth talking about? We had a version where there was a CS feat, like first person to X CS. That one was very hotly debated in the playtest. It was kind of funny because it was like, well, you CS'd really well, therefore, you win, you got it. But it also did lead to some friction where it would be like, oh, there, you're mid lane and you're like slightly losing to the enemy mid laner in the CS battle. You want to get the CS feat, and the enemy, say like the enemy was pushing a big wave into your bot lane, you could like go bot lane and steal their waves or whatever to like get the CS feat, which was kind of wild. It was not. It led to too much friction, I think, but it was kind of funny, like a funny experience having the like CS feat at the time. Um, I tried out some really weird feats as well from times. Like I had one that was like backstab enemies X time with your auto attack. I tried out one that was like get a certain number of plants. I tried, there was a time when another designer was helping me out. He had one that was like, as a team, collectively stand in bushes for X total seconds, um, which was very silly. We tried a lot of really wild stuff, and we kept wrapping around to stuff that was simple, understandable, and straightforward. That's kind of why, um, even though I definitely totally hear the concerns around First Blood is really important in the system, and that may cause too much friction or may cause a lot of friction. Um, First Blood is just a really good, recognizable, simple, straightforward event, right? Like it's really easy to tell a player, hey, this triggered because you were the first person to die, right? Comparatively to like this triggered because the enemy stood in bushes longer than you, or like got more backstabs than you, or did this like weird condition that you probably don't really want to think about that much in the game more than you. That's why First Blood is ultimately in this system is because it's simple, straightforward, and it's really understandable and it's very clear, right? And that is one thing that we really valued in this system was clarity of obtaining these, which is why I don't really love the grub thing about the monster slaying being the 3 grubs from 1 spawn. But there's not really any particularly good rule. It's just like grubs are really weird, and so none of the rules are super super clear. Like the clarity is not like great on any of them. But I think the rule that we have ends up being the most clear of all the options that we have. Um, One of the cool ones I did think about for grubs, by the way, was I thought this was like theoretically really cool. Was we could have made it so that when you get a grub like spawn stack, that's when you get credit. So like if you get 4 grubs, that's worth 1 epic monster kill, and then 6 is worth 2. But that's really weird because it's just so different from the other epic monsters. Even if it does kind of, I think, work well for the self-contained grub thing, it's kind of nice. It doesn't necessarily work that well for the purposes of the feed as a whole. What else could I talk about before I close up the video? I don't know. I don't know if people would rather me just like randomly ramble on at the end here, or if they'd rather cut the video. But I guess you kind of have the agency to just leave the video if you decide that I'm rambling a lot and that you don't care anymore. So I guess I'll keep doing it for at least a few more minutes if I can think of good topics. So like, what else is there that I could talk about? I had a cool idea for. Oh, this is a really good one. So very mild spoilers for Arcane. It's like, but when Ambessa is talking about the like might, guile, or might, guile, and vision of like how that's how the Noxian warrior fights. That was the original inspiration for me to come up with a system that I called Feats of Strength. The original 3 were might, guile, and strength. Right. The very original system was at the beginning of the game, 3 like there was a group of 3 different feats for every category, right? There were 3 feats for might, 3 feats for vision, and 3 feats for guile. And the game would just randomly decide like, hey, this game, this is the feat for might, this is the feat for guile, and this is the feat for vision. And then they all had their own individual rewards. So like the reward for guile and might and vision were always the same, but the way that you got them would be different per game. That was a really cool system. And I also really liked the theming. Though at that point, I personally had not seen the second season of Arcane, and so I didn't know how tied in those themes were. But it had a lot of problems. Obviously, we ended up pretty far from there. It was very cool, though. I think the theming was really nice, and I kind of wish that we had landed on 3 feats that we could, more strongly associate. Like if we could have said like First Blood is might and first turret is vision, and then if we had found a 3rd feat that like felt like it thematically aligned with guile, I think that would have been really cool. The problem is guile in League of Legends is really hard to express. Like what exactly can you do in League that is like clearly a guileful play? It's like, oh, flashing, you know, flashing out of vision and tricking your opponent. It's like, well, that's a pretty guileful play, but that also only happens like every, one in every like 50 games or something like that, right? Probably, maybe more, maybe less. I'm not sure. Um, but we didn't really have any good systemic like global events that felt like they fit Guile. And in general, the third feat, right, Monster Slaying, was really, really, really hard to land. We tried a lot of different third feats, but like none of them really felt nearly as good or as concise as First Blood and First Turret. Um, and so that's why we ended up on the three epics. I actually tested two epics for a while, but that was like too short and too jungle skewed. There wasn't enough time for the rest of the team to influence it, and so it felt like it was just like the jungler feat. So yeah, we tried a lot of different stuff. This system has seen a lot of change over its time. But yeah, I like where we ended up, and hopefully people like the boots. Hopefully people enjoy having tier 3 boots in the game. Um, yeah, and I want to be clear again for people who are giving feedbacks. Like, I am reading feedback, and I do agree it would be really nice if we could get these to be available for uh, both teams in an appropriate way, right? Like the way that they're structured right now, they are, part of it is like they're supposed to be cool partially because they're exclusive and they raise your cap for the winning team. You can be stronger at 6 items, but it's possible that we don't really need that. Maybe if we make them sufficiently expensive for the losing team and it's really only a 6 item thing, maybe that's fine. That's something we have really just not explored that much because I just haven't had time. So it's something I'll be thinking about. And yeah, if you have thoughts, feedback, comments, questions, concerns, yeah, send me, leave me a comment on this video or send me a message somewhere, whatever I'm around, Reddit, Twitter, all those places. Yeah, so hopefully people enjoyed this video. And if people didn't like the random rambling at the end, sorry. If you did, let me know or don't. I mean, I'll probably keep doing it. No one can stop me. Yeah, so I think that's it. Thanks for watching.